Welcome to the Oh So Spurs podcast, where Johnny and I will be talking you through why we believe you all need to remain calm amongst the storm. There shall be no bedwetting on Oh So Spurs today. And in the second half of this episode, we'll be joined by the brilliant Hamish Carton, who covered Ange Postecoglou during his time at Celtic. It will be very interesting to see if there are similarities to what we're experiencing now as a fan base and as a football club, whilst he was at Celtic versus where we are now with Ange. But Johnny, how are you? It looks very cold in Dublin, judging by your hat.
Trying to keep a lid on the gas bill. My room is the least important. So yeah, a bit chilly in here, but certainly not chilly in the Tottenham discourse is alive and well and firing in all cylinders after what happened yesterday and the latest episode of the Let's All Jump on the Back of Ange train. I don't know, I probably similar to you. I know you weren't at the match yesterday, but I came away. Obviously, there was lots of frustrations about what happened. If you'd said to me before the scoreline, I'd say, yeah, that sounds about right. I would certainly believe that. I like everybody who was being rational, probably thought, well, you never know, but the likelihood is probably going to lose, given form, etc., and availability and all that sort of stuff. I mean, yeah, there's so many things you can talk about. I suppose the thing that's getting all the attention is Postecoglou, his sort of position under scrutiny. There seems to be, and it's really difficult to know, and I know this is something we're talking about a lot at the moment, when it's not likely to change anytime soon, unless he actually left, which I don't see happening. But the chat is all about, after any performance where you don't get the win, it's some kind of like real serious weighing in on Ange. And that's kind of like, we've obviously got our position on that fairly nailed on. But it's becoming, it seems to be becoming more of a mainstream thing as well as just like the media seem to be jumping on it. And there's certain quarters of the media, like Carragher and stuff like that, apparently, they're like, the narrative is just, I think, far too simplistic, and people are really not like stating the obvious when they're talking about, like, even Danny Kelly today. I listened to the first 20 minutes of the View from the Lane this afternoon, and there's lots of really good quality punditry on that, but I also just find that incredibly frustrating because they were doing all this chat about our issues and there wasn't any talk about the blooming injury crisis. Like, I'm sorry, but it's incredibly relevant when you've got the way that we play and you've got our lack of personnel, like not being able to rest players, etc.
Yeah, well, people they don't want to add the context in because it doesn't help them. It seems to be not helping them cope with their own emotions when we lose. It's not about that. It's a very knee-jerk is the term I think people use often. But I was looking as an example, and people were saying, like, one of the main criticisms this season for Spurs has been Ange doesn't adapt to games. He doesn't proactively make changes. But then again, it comes down to context, because we've got 5 or 6 players on a good bench. You think they'll change the game for us. Now, when we haven't got Richarlison, Odegaard, Moore, Romero and Van der Ven had just come back. Those guys weren't available. Bentancur, the 6 senior players you'd look to change a game. They're not available off the bench. So you don't have those options. And I was looking at the bench for Fulham, right? And here they are. If you read them off, it's we brought on Lancashire, Kulusevski, Barry Valengray. So we used all the options we could, right? But the other options we had were Brandon Austin, Callum Latif Elisi, Luca Jamie Williams Barnett, Jed Spence, who in 3 years has never started a Premier League game, and Sergio Reguilon, who's kind of in that phase of your career where you're out of contract, just showcasing yourself on social media, hoping someone will pick you up one last time. So then they go, okay, well, still, he could have played Jed Spence, as if that's a championship wing-back is the defining thing we've been missing. The context is so much bigger than that. And where would... Arsenal had 1 win in 5 when they lost Martin Odegaard. And there was a lot of sympathy in the way they built their own narrative and the media, they've lost their talisman, they've lost the guy that makes it tick. And then it snapped back together when he came back. And you you kind of, and someone actually tried, we're having an argument with someone earlier who said, yeah, well, Arsenal, they know how to see out games when they go behind. And they went to get the stats and they said, actually, Arsenal failed to hold a lead more often than Spurs this season.
Yeah.
Which
There's no word of that. Yeah.
There's no word of the context to the story, is there?
And the same even with City. All you ever hear is Rodri. The with Rodri without Rodri stats. Just after any game they don't win, that's always up on the screen. So
absolutely,
it's completely true. I suppose, like, for the benefit of anyone who wasn't in the stadium yesterday, and I was fortunate because of situation at home, which wasn't so fortunate. But I missed the Fulham game and I missed the Ipswich game, so I didn't really miss anything with either of those. But you certainly didn't get a great impression from, and you would have been at those. But there was a lot of criticism of the crowd. Obviously, yesterday's outside of the North London derby, it's probably the biggest, most spiciest tie of the league at home. So you would certainly be hoping it would be a good atmosphere. And I thought the crowd was really up for it. Obviously, the team gave us 2 early goals. The place was absolutely, as you'd expect. There was a brilliant buzz. But the fans from the beginning, I was a little bit like, I didn't miss the start of the match, but I missed the tifo kind of thing. And obviously you could get onto the bits of paper flying around later. But, there was a good atmosphere. And there was a bit of pro-Ange chanting. There was no I didn't pick up on, there was, maybe people were a bit frustrated afterwards, but there's sort of a philosophical mood at the end of the game, I felt, in the stadium. And weren't the boos there have been over the last couple of previous home games. So again, when you're coming down to it, like, you're looking in WhatsApp groups and you're looking at X, or you're reading the stuff that the media want to be focusing on, it isn't really reflecting what I'm seeing around me in the stadium. And maybe I'm completely biased. I mean, I've definitely, like every one of us, I'm emotional about it, and I care a lot about it, and I've got my own opinion. So maybe it's sort of there's some kind of bias going on in what I'm picking up on, and I can see lots of other channels, and everybody's got their right to have their own opinion. But there seem to be more channels kind of being openly quite critical of the manager, which it surprises me. There's not everybody. There's definitely others that are a bit more like ourselves. So it's just a really strange situation. And you've said yourself, like, looking at the fixtures coming up, it's not going to, like, get a whole lot better anytime soon. I mean, the other really interesting thing about the game, other than the actual playing of the match itself, is the lineup clearly deserves to be kind of put into the conversation, because I remember listening to Golden Guest at the end of last week, and they were kind of like referring to the VDV early return last year. It might have been against Villa, and it was a couple of months ahead of schedule. And they were sort of speculating, imagine if Van de Ven was on the bench or something, or they were really saying could Kuti come back? And then there was like, imagine if VDV was back. And then you saw the lineup, thought, bloody hell, they're both starting. It was like, this is amazing. And you were a little bit worried that it was a risk too far, and you could understand why. And you sort of think, if this gamble pays off, it could be amazing. So it was great to see them on the pitch. Obviously, it didn't go well with Romero, but it was really good to see Van de Ven. I know he probably isn't 100% match fit, but to have him at least with Dragusin, if Romero, well, he is out, it is a bit more encouraging. I guess that has to be carefully managed. It's just another one of those sort of variables in the mix of a very complex soup of, like, not a very nice soup that we have to deal with.
Yeah, it's frustrating that Romero's injury was, because a lot of people said, look, that was a big risk to play him like that, but it was an injury completely unrelated to his last one. Although ironically, the last couple of times he's got injured has been from doing some kind of tackle or skill or movement on the pitch that was kind of, you could deem it unnecessary. Although at the same time, it wasn't like it was some reckless, crazy thing he did. It was a bit of bad luck there. I think what made the Chelsea result feel a bit worse and make the short-term reaction from our own fans a bit dramatic was we went to that game very philosophical. We don't expect to win. We've simmered down a bit as a fan base, most of us, about 90% of us, and we've gone, you know what? Let's just treat the season as transition phase 2. It's normal. It aligns with what Klopp and Arteta were like in their second season, their comparable rebuilds, all that stuff. If we get something from this, what a bonus. But in the same way I expect to beat Man City, I don't expect to beat Chelsea. And the season we've turned a corner, by the way, will be when we lose to Man City and we beat Chelsea. So
that's true.
But then the lineup comes out and we go, wait a sec. Van de Ven and Romero are playing. Hello, we've got a chance. And I think our expectations just rose.
Hi, guys.
Hey, Hamish, great to see you.
How are you?
You doing well?
Good to be on.
Yeah, good
Early
to have you on.
start here.
I know. When did you move over to Australia?
So I've been here for about 18 months now, so like August last year. So, no, it's good.
Congrats. I hope it's going well for you, and thanks for joining us today. We thought we'd start before and get the Tottenham-Chelsea debrief bit kind of done, because that's probably going to bore the living daylights out of you as we discuss Pedro Porro's stats and all that kind of stuff, which I will just drop in as the last comment on that game, by the way. I was kind of... I've got this bit of a... you do get a bit of a bias towards certain players you think are a part of a cause. I thought, Porro's the one I'm going to dig out. I went on there and all the stats gave the opposite impression.
He was really good.
Played, he's played 90 minutes, 14 out of 15 games this season, had the most touches in the final third, made the most clearances, most blocks, most completed passes, and most progressive passes. So Pedro Porro, I take it back. I hope you didn't delete your Twitter account because of me. But yeah, Hamish... Go on,
sorry, I'm gonna just one other thing about the game, just because we've not really spoken about the game particularly, and I obviously want to take advantage of having an expert with us to look into the Ange thing in particular. But like the game, we lost and we threw away a 2-goal lead, and the focus again is all about the negatives, and there wasn't all negatives. There were significant, in my opinion anyway, there were significant positives to be taken from it. And again, the context of like Chelsea, where Chelsea are at, they're obviously their personnel issues is the polar opposite of ours. They've got maybe one player who's a doubt in their squad. They're able to make 9 changes from the European game, the midweek before. And like obviously there were 2 stupid fouls. We gave away 2 stupid penalties, especially the second one, which was where Sarr taking down somebody who's going towards the corner flag, which is ridiculous in a completely benign part of the box. Caicedo's tackle, which we haven't discussed, which most people who are fairly independent would say he was lucky to get away with that, and Caicedo's one of the players who was fouled. So it's not like I'm being revisionist about it. Like when Chelsea definitely were the better team yesterday, but when you look at those individual moments, even like the third goal, Fernandes goal, your man Cole Palmer, who's absolutely brilliant player, by the way. He was on fire, just dribbling from the right hand side of the box, takes a shot. The shot deflects off one of our defenders, and it falls straight into the perfect position for Fernandes to take a very nice finish, handy at the bottom corner. So the kind of things were going against us. I mean, yeah, we had chances to score from Sonny particularly, and there was a good chance for Solanke as well. So, I mean, in another day, it goes in another direction. I mean, if you're taking away the penalties, the XG, which we don't really want to dwell on too much, was pretty even. And, it's not as if there was, at the end of everyone's just focusing on Tottenham were winning 2-0, and then they ended up getting fairly handily beaten. It's not really what happened. And people are just, with the whole discussion about Ange, which is obviously what we're going to be focusing on with Hamish, there's like certain people who have a certain notion of, this naivety and this, just like fantasyland football, that just cannot work in this the league being so superior in England. It's just that's kind of what is taken out of the game, and it's going to be interesting to see what Hamish thinks of what's been going on
Hamish,
at Tottenham.
You've been by popular demand, by the way. And we're wearing our green in support of your beloved Celtic today. And there you go. You're wearing white for Spurs, and I'm actually at Ibrox on Thursday obviously with a bunch of Celtic fans actually
Right.
supporting Spurs, obviously. So yeah, it's great to have you on. And we really appreciate your time today.
Yeah.
We actually had quite a few questions in from listeners directed at you, but before we start into that, I'm keen to just get your quick view on, how the time of Ange at Celtic kind of, were you a big ambassador of his the whole way through? Did you go through this whole journey as we seem to be describing, where you're having ups and downs, and who the hell is this guy being the initial thing that comes in when he comes in? How can a guy from Australia possibly manage a football team in Europe? Did you go through that journey as well as a Celtic person covering the club?
Yeah, we definitely did. So, don't know if you guys remember, but after the kind of terrible COVID season that we had, where basically everything went wrong, we had like a 2 or 3 month protracted pursuit of Eddie Howe to become our next manager. And obviously he was someone who was really well known, the ideal candidate in many ways, because he reminded us all a bit of Brendan Rodgers. And I think we found out about Easter time that he was going to be joining. And then literally 2-3 months, maybe 2 months of that chat, and one Friday afternoon in the summer it all ended, and we found out Eddie Howe wasn't coming to the club, and there was real disappointment there, obviously. And then a couple of hours later we heard the name Ange Postecoglou for the first time, and we heard that he was effectively going to be the new manager, and it was very far down the road. And yeah, the general reaction, I guess, in comparison to Eddie Howe, who's someone who we all knew really well, was like, who is Ange Postecoglou? I genuinely had never heard of him, which is a crazy thing to say, because he'd managed the Socceroos at a World Cup and won trophies and done really well wherever he'd gone. But I had never heard the name, and immediately it felt like a bit of a cheap appointment. And I'd say generally that was the reaction. People were kind of pretty unhappy that we'd missed out on Eddie Howe, and were then going for a guy that a lot of us, or the majority of us, had never heard of. But very quickly, I think you get round to the idea of you have to get behind this guy, because like, what's the alternative? You sit and want the team to lose every game. That's obviously not something you're going to do. So we got behind him. He arrives in Scotland from Japan, and suddenly starts speaking at press conferences, and suddenly you just kind of fall in love with the guy. A wee bit, I'm guessing, like you guys have, or certainly did in the first season. And yeah, from that point, I think everyone's behind him. We got off to a pretty rocky start, which is different from you guys. That's the strange thing. Like, I think virtually every club he's been to, there's been a tough start where he kind of goes into a club that's struggling and moves on some players and signs some players, and the players get up to speed with how he wants to do things, and the fitness side of it as well, which is a big part. I think every club he goes to in that first season, you see a real spate of injuries at one stage. We certainly had it. I know you guys had it. But yeah, he just gradually kind of wins you over. As I say, tough start. We reached a point where people were doubting things. We were struggling domestically. We lost our first 3 away games of the season, including a derby, which is like unheard of for Celtic. I think we were like 5th or 6th in the league after 5 games. And then it just clicks, and we win a game at Aberdeen where we didn't play particularly well, but we scored away from home 87 minutes to win that game. And from that point, it was just like a snowball that gathered momentum the whole way. So I guess you guys have been different in that you had this incredible start. And I watched a lot of Spurs at the start of last season, and you guys were like top of the league. And then potentially that Chelsea game last season was kind of the one where it started to go a little bit wrong. But I still think there's been really good moments since then watching Spurs, like some really good performances. But it's been different. It's been interesting how it's been different to what normally happens at clubs. I'm not sure the reason for that.
Yeah, it feels like there's numerous reasons why, and one is that injury crisis scenario you mentioned. The context is, when Ange came into Spurs, we'd just come 8th, but we'd come 8th because Heung-min Son and Harry Kane hadn't carried us to 8th. So I feel like the reality of the squad was it was probably the 12th, to 14th best team in the league that season. It had gotten that bad. And we made a number of signings. The squad overhaul began. But what was very clear that years of neglect had left a Tottenham squad pretty much with a decent first 11, not perfect by any means.
Very old as well.
Very old, that one or two injuries and the whole thing would just fall apart again. And that Chelsea game saw us lose 3 or 4 key players. And then you hit that. It was the timing of it. It's happened again just now. Both our centre-backs go off injured. And you go, we've got 6 games in 3 weeks. How? And you know that's going to result in 2 or 3 more missing, nothing on the bench, problems snowball. I guess what's different with Ange that we haven't had with other managers in the past is the fans, the majority of the fans are still on his side. There's some who aren't now. They're starting to turn a bit. There's probably about 20-30% of them are turned. But the players came out today, our vice captain came out today, Romero, and said, basically took a dig at the board. He said, essentially, you can't expect us to compete when other clubs can sign players to build big quality squads and we don't get the resources to do that. And he was kind of standing up for Ange in the face of all this media stuff. And the players have all come out and basically said they're behind him and they're fully back in this project. The media have been told that our board is saying they're fully behind the guy. And I think that comes from his gravitas and the way he holds himself and doesn't make excuses, that we're saying, no, we're going to weather the storm with you. We're going to see if you can get to that second season mark, get you 5 or 6 more players and see if you can turn it around. But it does seem very different to the Celtic experience of slow start, upturn, and no real dip, right? There was never really a wobble in the middle period. You just went from strength and strength, right?
Yeah, there really wasn't. Yeah. I mean, apart from that start we made to the first season, and then we obviously won the league in the first season, and the second season was just plain sailing. The European stuff, which I'm guessing you guys will want to touch on, was tough. But also, I didn't think we were a million miles away. And obviously, now this season, we're doing pretty well in the Champions League. And I think, part of that is down to Brendan Rodgers being a really good manager. But I think part of it is also what Ange did. Like, I genuinely believe that. It feels like a continuation this season of what we had last season under Rodgers and what we had the year before under Ange. But I mean, we did have, there was a game in our first season when we played Bayer Leverkusen in the Europa League, and we played really well at home and lost 4-0. And it was like it was an even game. We'd had as many chances as them, but they'd been completely ruthless and beat us 4-0. And I think Ange has spoken about after that game being the moment, basically, where he said to the players, this is how it's going to be. You either come with me in this journey and this is how we're going to play, or, you don't and this doesn't work. So I wonder if I know it's a good bit further down the line, but I wonder if that's the kind of point Spurs have reached. And to be honest, I think it's in moments like that where Ange really kind of comes good. I think he really enjoys these moments. He's not enjoying it right now, but he's spoken a lot about really enjoying the moments where you have to build the team through the tough moments. Yeah,
and he's spoken about that before, hasn't he, Johnny, where he said he's actually gone as far, and this really split the fans. He didn't make any subs in a game. Yeah. And his argument for that, when we were losing, and everyone's like, why is he not bringing 3 senior pros on? Crystal Palace to change it around. And he said, well, he felt the players on the pitch there, who had previously and historically had a reputation of just being very weak mentally and folding under pressure, thought that if he took them off, he was giving their escape route, the easy option off, get off the pitch, someone else's problem. He said he wanted them to suffer, them to learn and go through it for the long-term benefit. And he always talks about the long-term.
Yeah.
So he says, I don't make decisions for today. I make decisions for what's best for this club in the long term. And that does include sometimes what's not best for the next 30, 60 minutes of a football match to benefit the longer-term journey he's trying to take us on. Did he talk about stuff like that with you? Or was that another unique Spurs thing?
No, the quote I always remember was I need to get this right, he acts like he'll be in charge of a club for the rest of his life or forever, knowing full well that he won't be. I always think that kind of sums up how he thinks about things. He's well aware that when you look at Ange's career, he only tends to spend 2 or 3 years at a club anyway, before moving on. And I think part of that might be that maybe his methods over time can become a little bit grating for players. I don't know. Brendan Rodgers certainly has that issue, and that's why he only stays for a few years at a club, unless there was a few more. But that's a quote I always remember from Ange, that he plans or he acts like he'll be in charge forever, knowing fine well he won't be.
And
it's an interesting situation, Hamish, because I'm Irish, but I grew up in Inverness, so I've familiarity with Scotland, and you often, when your primary focus is on the Premier League, and there's, it's a great league in terms of entertainment. There's a huge amount of quality across the board, and all of that. Scottish football is, since the days I remember in the 80s when there was a hell of a lot of amazing players, and you got Dundee United in the UEFA Cup final, and Aberdeen beating Real Madrid in the Cup Winners' Cup final, and people sort of have this view now that it's a Mickey Mouse league and it's a joke, and it'll be interesting to see what happens on Thursday at Ibrox, because I think it'll be a very spicy match altogether, and without wanting to get too sidetracked on that, the whole business of Ange's challenge, I suppose, relative between the Premier League and managing Celtic. I mean, let's be honest, it is getting on for 40 years since a club outside the old firm has won the title in Scotland. So I mean, you can't argue with that. People say, oh, you've just got one team to beat, and although that's not strictly true, it's still fundamentally, historically, it is basically true. So when he's sort of made his impact on Celtic, and that first season they kind of came from behind, and it was a handy enough win in the end, but Rangers were the favourites to win the league that year, undoubtedly, because they'd won the year before, and Celtic were definitely in a transition. So he definitely deserves a lot of credit for that season. But I sort of think, well, when you've got it right there, then you're not going to have the same level of potential disruption, I suppose, to actually sustaining and building success. And a really good friend of mine, is a huge Celtic supporter as well, was really his level of disappointment in him leaving Celtic was because he felt that there was something happening in terms of the challenge, as you said, was in Europe, and how they're going from these glorious defeats at the likes of, like you said, Dortmund, and then Barcelona the following season in the Champions League. Celtic is a huge club, but it's operating in a different pond altogether from what Andrew's had to deal with before. And I wouldn't doubt his character and his resolve and his determination and his conviction and his beliefs, but I suppose in the Premier League, it is another level, not just in terms of media scrutiny, but also just the reality of when you're going out against Nottingham Forest, as we are on Boxing Day, or Ipswich a couple of weeks ago, those, you see those names, you think, come on, we got to beat them. But United lost the other day to Forest at home, so there's anyone can beat anyone, and for us, especially with the situation with the players, obviously are expected to do the intensity of the play with the sort of lack of respite, not getting opportunities to rest. I don't know if he's been in this situation before, and I just wonder what your response would be to the likes of the supporters who are really, really skeptical, who would suggest that he would be very dismissive and patronising, in my opinion, of his naivety and his stubbornness, and the fact that he's just out of his depth. What do you think about that sort of narrative? Because it is another level of challenge that he's probably faced before.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously he's never managed in the Premier League. I would say Celtic were probably a bit of an anomaly in his career in terms of being the dominant team. Because you look at the challenge he had before with Yokohama F Marinos, and I'd need to look for sure, but I'm pretty sure they were near the top, the bottom of the table when he joined. I'm pretty sure they were kind of flirting with relegation maybe in his first season, and only just stayed up, and then suddenly they went up the table. And I think the Japanese league, as I understand it, I'm sure I heard a stat that it's had the most unique winners over the past couple of decades, more than any other league in the world, the Japanese league. Australia here, when he managed here, they have a salary cap in this league, so by definition it's very even. So I think he has had challenges where he's not necessarily always been the biggest team in the league with the most resources. So I certainly think, he's capable of like managing in games where you're not always the big favourite. And like for me, again, you guys know better, but like it's not like Spurs are hopeless in every game. Like you guys have some really good games where you complete. I mean, some of your wins this season have been big wins, and your defeats have been pretty narrow. So I don't know. I mean, consistency wasn't something that he clearly struggled for in Scotland. And I mean, some of the stuff, I do think some of the stuff you hear about him is nonsense about his team's not been able to hold on to leads and stuff like that. I just think it's a bit of a lazy argument. I mean, plenty of examples from his time at Celtic where we played derbies against Rangers, and it was like a good Rangers team at the time that reached the Europa League final in his first season. And some of the examples in games there of us really closing out games well and showing a different side. So I've not seen much of Spurs recently, but I think the narrative that like you're just always going for more goals and completely leaving yourself open, I personally don't think is fair in terms of an Ange team, because there was plenty of times we were a goal ahead against Rangers and actually ended up closing out the game really well from the way he does things.
That is what you've described is really common, is all the data shows we're not going all gung-ho for 90 minutes, but every pundit has the same discussion point every time we go into a game. Tottenham have only one way of playing. Jamie Carragher's latest one is you wouldn't put shorts and t-shirt on when it's raining outside. That's what Ange does every week. And it's so exhausting. Like against Chelsea, we had less than 40% possession. He went all out, got a 2-goal lead and tried to protect it, and we conceded 4 goals. Like, because we had nothing off the bench. But we've actually conceded because we've retained winning positions more than Arsenal this season. Like, so none of the stats match up with the narrative, but the narrative persists relentlessly. And that's what makes it just so exhausting. It's someone described it as, he's just a FIFA tactics manager. And I just find it, like, the guy has played over his career, I think, 5 different major formations. When he was managing the Socceroos, he actually went to 3 at the back and went to a similar Conte ball style of play. Like, when he talks about his philosophy of like, I'm never going to change, I think people say that means he only plays one tactic. He doesn't mean that. He means his principles around how he plays never change. In the same way that Pep Guardiola doesn't micromanage a squad. He goes, here are the principles of the way we play, and we stick to those principles. But you still are allowed to have your own decisions in a game. You're still allowed to adapt in that match. You're still allowed to be pragmatic at points, but you just don't play to the clock. You play to there's all these other principles he's talking about. People mix up with, he just means chuck everyone up front and see what happens, and then you'll get caught out. And but that rolls into one of these questions we had for you, Hamish, actually. We've answered Rick's, which was comparing the changes you saw at Celtic versus Spurs, which said is more different. It's actually quite different. But in your opinion, did Celtic's Champions League record indicate that a system can't work effectively against high caliber opposition? Is that a fair criticism in your view? Did you come across that?
I don't think so, because I think we played pretty similarly now. There's maybe small differences under Brendan Rodgers. I do genuinely think we're more controlled now under Brendan Rodgers, and I think that's a kind of common thought amongst the Celtic support. But I think it's a general similar level of play. I just think looking back at, and we only had one season in the Champions League under Ange, I think a lot of it was about it being the first campaign in the Champions League for the majority of our players, and we're now 3 years into that for a lot of players. So I think that's why there's been a bit of an upturn. I think we maybe only had 4 players in that first season under Ange in the Champions League who had played in the tournament before. So you were going in and you had players making their mistakes, learning at that level. So I felt the game plan could work. It worked in a few of our games. I mean, people always talk about the first half against Real Madrid, where we were the better team in that game against the team that had just won the Champions League. The tactics were working fine at that point. We just didn't take our chances. We hit the bar. Dyson Maida missed a great chance. And then Real Madrid stepped it up in the second half. We did tire a little bit, which potentially I think is something that nowadays we don't tire as much. And maybe that comes from just having a little bit more control in what you're doing. But again, it might just come from experience of players and knowing, having more games under their belt at that level. But like we played Shakhtar Donetsk away, drew 1-1, completely dominated them, just couldn't take our chances. So, you win one of those games and it suddenly looks very different for Ange Postecoglou. It was a kind of challenging group we were in with Real Madrid and Leipzig. The year previous in the Europa League, we got some good results. Again, pretty tough group. So I certainly think, and again, you've seen examples of it at Spurs, that the Ange game plan can work. I don't think it's a case of like the minute he comes up against good teams that this system doesn't work.
Well, the irony in that narrative that still exists is we've won most of our games against elite opposition this year and actually lost the games against what they deem the lesser teams in inverted commas. But I think a lot of this is the classic kind of like Premier League fandom arrogance around being a fan of a Premier League club. It's kind of, or top 6 Premier League club, I should say, one of the big 6 or big 7 is how dare anyone else think they could possibly beat us? Do you know who we are? It's that kind of thing of how could little old Fulham get a point against the mighty Cockerels? And so I'm like, well, they're still a £300 million turnover club with 11 freaking amazing players and a very ambitious owner behind them. It's not an insult when they can come to your gaff and get a point if they play well. They're not a bunch of slouches. But that question was from Clive. Did you have a point there, Johnny? Sorry, you're trying to add.
Not really. No, I suppose one of the things I was wondering in terms of Celtic, or just what Hamish would think in general, from what you remember and know of Ange, when you've got a situation, was there a situation where there was a similar challenge regarding availability of personnel, and like is the Ange ball way of playing, is it compatible with that sort of pressure? And I think that's where we are now, which is such a sort of kind of really extreme situation with the number of games we have and the number of players who we don't have. Is it just, do we need because his it is a sort of all or nothing. It is a sort of buy into the philosophy and his demands of the players to be fully committed. But can we actually play like that when we've got hardly anybody on the bench, as Jim said earlier, and in so many games.
Yeah, we had a spell in our first season where our injury list was horrendous. I remember there was a Europa League game against Real Betis where he changed the entire team. Partly because it was a dead rubber, but also because he didn't want to risk any more injuries. And our first choice striker, our first choice striker that night, who I think was our third choice striker, started the game and tore his hamstring. And Ange brought on Kyogo, which was a controversial sub at the time because people would have just taken anyone on in that position rather than risking it. And then Kyogo hurt his hamstring in that match and actually ended up missing virtually the rest of the season. I think he came back briefly and then missed virtually the rest of the season. On top of that, I try to remember we had our first choice right back was injured. I think both of our centre backs were injured. I think a couple of midfielders were out as well. And I always remember there was a game a few weeks later, which was one of the defining games away to Ross County, where we scored like the 96th minute. And our front three was our right winger through the middle, our right back at right wing, and our left back at left wing. And it was ridiculous. And obviously the rest of the team was struggling. So we did have our moments, but not too dissimilar from what Liverpool had when Jurgen Klopp first went in, what Leeds had under Marcelo Bielsa. Very similar, and it's clearly linked to the fact that these players are having to do more running than they would under normal managers. But you guys had a hell of a run last year. We didn't really in our second year. That was the thing, and I think he used the squad a lot better in the second year because he had more options. We signed a lot more players. He could rotate players in and out, so there was nowhere near the same level of injuries in the second year.
And that's where I think the pressure, Johnny's changed this year. Is normally we hit to the manager now with a stick, but the majority have looked upstairs and said, actually, this was avoidable because we signed 4 or 5 teenagers over the last year when we should have signed 4 or 5 players Ange Postecoglou could be rotating with at the moment to avoid these situations. And that's left him in a difficult situation. But did you find, because a lot of our injuries are actually, Mikey Moore's out with an illness, Richarlison's issues are kind of umbrella. He's never had a string of games in Ange to get familiar with how he plays. Odegaard's a new signing. It feels like feels like for us, the players that did the first season and saw it out do seem to be getting better at handling his style of football. Did you notice that shift of those legacy players being injured less often that had done the first season with him?
Yeah, definitely. There was,
Okay.
as I say, second season, it was, I can't remember many injuries that we had. And I think a big part of that was these players being up to speed, but also, as I say, having a squad that he could bring players in and out. And he really used the squad as well.
And one thing about the squad there that we don't have in ours, and I wondered if this type of player stood out to you that you did sign, we don't really have a reliable 6, a kind of combative, everyone says a Rodri because everyone wants the best midfielder in the world in a Rodri. But you know what I mean? That a better version of Højbjerg that we had.
Yeah.
We've got Basuma, but he gave away a penalty and is always full of a mistake or a red card or an injury. But was that kind of player important to the system when you had Ange as a manager?
So we've got Callum McGregor who plays that position, and he was completely vital. He was the most important player during Ange's time at the club because he's just a hell of a player. He tried to sign a number of players for that position. I think just to have a bit of backup so he could bring McGregor in and out. And none of them really worked, which was something like, so we tried James McCarthy, and he right at the start he had injury problems, and then we went to Japan to sign a player and it didn't work, and we signed a Danish guy who didn't work, and there was a number of other ones, another Japanese player actually who kind of worked but is now at Birmingham. But that position, he did seem, if it wasn't Callum McGregor, he did seem to struggle to actually sign someone in that position, which I always found a little bit strange. It might be unique to Celtic because McGregor's the captain and he always plays, and it's maybe difficult for someone else to come in and actually get game time. But we're just fortunate that we have someone like McGregor. Maybe you could look to bring in someone like McGregor to work under Ange again. He might do the job. I don't know why I'm suggesting that, but
it's an interesting one as well, Hamish, because another one of the, I think, completely legitimate conversations we have as Tottenham fans is that leadership issue. And Ange came in, and within a few weeks he'd given the armband to Son, and he's given Maddison and Romero are vice captains. And most fans would probably kind of think that, it's not as bad as when, Pochettino came in and gave the armband to Yunus Kabul, and that he did a U-turn on that within a few weeks because, Yunus Kabul wasn't even getting a game before. But like, we are light, undoubtedly, we're really light in terms of leadership. And I'm wondering, like, would you see Ange, how would he play this situation? Because, I mean, if we see it, he presumably is seeing this and he's got his own thoughts on it. But we've got the likes of Kulusevski, who's really emerging as our best player of the season, who also, when you watch the game, I was at the stadium yesterday, when you're there, the response to the situations you want your captain to step forward, to galvanize the team, to get the troops kind of recalibrated and back on track, etc. He was very, very clearly, to me, and my son was saying the same thing. Like, we were just looking at the body language and looking at how they're interacting, and he stood out a mile. And Sonny's on the pitch, and Sonny's got his body language is just sort of defeated, it would seem. I'm sure. Romero's gone off injured, and Maddison, well, he probably wasn't on at that stage, but Maddison is basically a prima donna. So, like, would you see that Ange would, because Sonny is obviously a bit of an icon for us, and there's all sorts of issues with him and his, where he's at in his career and stuff. What do you think he might do there? Would he be able to, or would he have the willingness to make a change like that? Because that would be quite a big statement to change a club captain. I think it's something we need.
He certainly wouldn't shy away from something like that, like generally speaking, making a decision. Clearly, he's not afraid. He's not afraid to make a decision if he thinks it's going to be better for the team. Whether he actually does specifically to that situation, I'm not sure. I think him and Son have quite a strong relationship. I wasn't surprised when he gave it to him, just given their kind of time in Asia. I know they'd kind of crossed paths a little bit, and he also when he signs players, and he'll have spoken about this a lot, but he doesn't just sign the footballer; he signs the person as well, and he signed a lot of kind of big personalities for us as well. Like we had a stage where you could have had about 5 or 6 different players as captain, and I don't know if he's got that at Spurs at the moment. Again, I don't know a lot about them, but I've been a little bit surprised, and I don't know if Ange is signing the players or whatever, but some of the signings I kind of look at and been a little bit surprised, like Timo Werner, for example. I was a bit surprised that was the player Ange went for. And like Brennan Johnson, I think, has his moments. Again, you guys know far better than me. Clearly is an Ange player in terms of pace, but could that signing have been a different player, a wee bit more personality, maybe a wee bit more experience?
Yeah, the Johnson one's an odd one because it was actually Ange's first handpicked signing. He was hell bent on Johnson, and he called him out as this guy he desperately wanted. And he divides fans so much because his output on paper is brilliant, but when you watch him on a pitch, you go, "Can you run a bit more? Can you press? Can you be a bit more vocal and be a leader? Where's your conviction?" Yeah. So anyway, we're going down a rabbit hole of the Brennan Johnson debate, but it definitely feels like Ange lacks a few personalities on the pitch that represent what he stands for. He's got no one there. Sonny's just a lovely lead by example type. He's not going to say, "Guys, remember the plan," and give someone a shake. And I'm assuming that's what you're kind of saying you had in your team, those stronger names and people that they were just fighters and warriors. I can't really think of any. We've got a couple of South American players who stereotypically fall into the camp of not being shy of going in hard on a tackle, but that doesn't make them great leaders. And I don't think they are great leaders in Bentancur and Romero. Personally, they've actually given away calamitous decisions through those reckless moments in big games when we needed the most. So, it's an interesting one. And the only other thing that's weird, I've noticed Ange never goes into his old club and goes, "I'm bringing these 2 people with me," be it staff, the players. He leaves 99% of them alone. Did he do the same at Celtic, or did he dip into some of his old clubs and say, "That guy's someone I can rely on"?
Yeah, a couple of players he signed from Yokohama Marinos, Daizen Maeda, who's been great for us, and he signed a few other players from Japan that he dealt with, firsthand there in teams he'd gone up against. But yeah, I was surprised maybe some more players that he'd worked with maybe hadn't, or even like coaches and stuff. It's quite well documented. He went into Celtic and himself didn't bring any coaches with him. Harry Kuehl joined after a year, but they hadn't necessarily worked together. So yeah, it's an interesting thing he does. It clearly works for him. I think he quite enjoys convincing new people to come aboard, and he thinks it keeps him fresh and probably keeps him on the toes. And he's all about like going out of his comfort zone. He never wants to be in his comfort zone. He doesn't want anyone around him at the club to be in their comfort zone. And maybe he feels that if he brings people he's worked with in the past, he's maybe slipping into a little bit of a comfort zone. But I don't know. I've been a little bit surprised maybe that there's not been any talk of any Celtic players moving to Spurs over the past 18 months. Like I thought Matt O'Reilly, who's at Brighton now, would have been an obvious one. But there's maybe talk that they'd slightly fallen out at the end. I think reading between the lines, so that might have been the reason for that. Or any of the Japanese players. I mean, I think Kyogo would have been a good fit for Spurs as an option, or Reo Hatate as well. So I've been a little bit surprised about that.
Interesting. Well, that was all our members' questions we had. So thanks, Rick, Vaz, Greg, Clive, Texas, Waylon, for those. Sorry we didn't read them out word for word, but I think we got your points across there. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us, Hamish. It's been great. And whereabouts we've actually got quite a few people who are actually kind of general football fans rather than necessarily Spurs fans joining in for kind of the Ange ride. So if they want to find you, where's their best platform to get hold of your content?
So I'm on YouTube. Celtic AM is my YouTube channel. Started about 10 months ago now. I had a channel previously, but this is my channel now. So people can find me on Celtic AM if you want some good chat about Celtic going for the treble and the quadruple this season with the Champions League as well.
Nice. Thanks. And to our regular listeners, did you know that 70% of you don't subscribe? How dare you? Come on. It takes not I was going to say 30 seconds. It probably takes about half a
30
second
nanoseconds.
to click that button, and then we can milk Google for a bit more money. Not you, but Google. So go on. Help us out. Help us take a few pennies off a conglomerate, won't you? Cheers. And the audio pod is there. We get a lot more traction these days with the video content like this on YouTube. If you're listening on audio, yes, we are on YouTube as well. And the video will come out a day early of this episode to our members, as it always does. It's to all episodes, and we'll read out members' questions each week. So if you want to be a member, you can sign up on YouTube for $1.99 a month. Bargain. All right. Up the Spurs, and good luck to Celtic, Hamish.
Boys, Spurs, yeah. Up the boys.
Good luck to you guys on Thursday night.
Cheers. Yes,
Exactly.
we'll try to do you proud.